So let's start. If you go to Stenciljs website, on the Getting Started, they give us a really neat command to bootstrap a stencil application. Here you're going to have a choice to create a PWA with Ionic or a stencil app. The stencil app will have a stencil router, and the Ionic will have Ionic router. And the other one is just for a basic component. We're not going to be using this command because I find that the best way to learn about a new tool is to build it at least once from scratch. So on my terminal, I'm going to create a folder for our new project, and we're going to start from there. So I'm going to navigate to my desktop, and here I'm going to create a folder with mkdir. I'm going to call my project Firestain for Firebase and Stencil. I'm going to seed into it. The first thing you need to do is to initialize a npm. You can do that with npm init. And here I'm going to pass the -y flag, so I don't need to answer any of the questions. It's going to be as default. Now I'm going to open it in my coding editor. So this is the file that was created. It's going to remove this main and keywords, because that's mainly for if you're building a library. It's going to change the license. And add an author. Here in the description is going to be a Stencil Ionic app with Firebase. That's what you're going to be building. So here on the script files, I'm going to add two scripts. One is for starting an application. And here first we need to tell the Stencil compiler to build it. Then you're gonna say that it's for we are in developing mode. So that will exclude any service worker. We want it to watch as well for changes, and we want to serve it in the browser. We can also do a build command, so we can just build our app instead of serving it. So that's the basic what we need to do. Now let's install our dependencies. The basic ones you're gonna need will be Stencil Core, Stencil Sass, because you're gonna be using SCSS, and the Ionic library as well. So I'm gonna open the terminal, and I'm gonna first install Ionic as a normal dependence. So it's a Ionic core. And now I'm gonna do the dev dependence, because we only need the stencil to build our application. We won't need it after. So add stencil core and stencil sass. So now that that's done, I'm just gonna close the terminal, and here we have it. So now this command, the stencil build command, will get our files transpiled. So we first need to tell the compiler what to do with the TypeScript files. Let's create a file called tsconfig.json. And here I'm gonna paste a bunch of stuff. So let's get started with what we want TypeScript to do with our files. We're telling here that we're going to be coding, for example, in the module, we're going to be coding anything from old JavaScript to newer, like async await, and we want it to compile it to ES17. Here in this case, if you need your app to be running on old devices, you can specify here an old version of JavaScript. If you hover over the key, you can find all the options available. For example, if you need a really old device, you would use these ones. And yeah, these other ones, you can see what it does as well. And also, we're going to add some JSX, because Stencil use JSX as a template language. Stencil also use decorators from ES7. So we're gonna mark it as a true. This allow synthetic imports is just so you don't need to type star as Firebase, for example, when you import something. No use local, so if you leave anything imported that you don't use it, it's gonna give you a warning. Same is for parameters that you don't use it. And the latest thing you're gonna add, it's where you're gonna put our files and what to exclude from the package. We don't want it to compile any of the code that we import to our application, and we're gonna put our code into the source folder. So let's go ahead and create this folder. And here it's gonna leave every file we created regarding our application. So this file is done. You can check the website for the TypeScript website for options, and you can add more to help you build better code. So this is done. Now the next one, we need to configure the Stencil compiler. This was for the TypeScript. Now we do the Stencil. So I'm just going to create a new file called stencil config.ts. And here I'm going to import config from Stencil core and Sass. So let's start. First, we need to tell what type of app we're building. So the output targets, you can specify if you want the type of a web page, a website, for example, or if you want a library, which would be like a basic component. If you're building to distribute it in the NPM register. And again, if you hover it, you can get some more information about it. We're gonna have a global script for our main imports for application, and also a main global styles. And that I'll put in as a main.ts file. So let's create that file. And here, one of the first things that we need to import for the main is obvious. The only thing that we installed yet is the Ionic core. So this is going to be available to every component in our app. So it just makes sense to put over here. Now let's do a global style. So source again, styles.scss. So let's create it as well. So on this file, let's import the Ionic style sheets. This I copied from a previous build from this command. I built an app and I just copied it from there. So command you take in just build one, like with that command, take a look how they do it. So we have our main. Now we need index file. And here, if you do a bank, you can tab it and it's gonna create a basic mockup for you. Okay, so now we have that one. And one more thing here on let's add the Sass now to our compiler options. One more thing I like to do is, you see, it's a dev server option. And it's about opening the browser. If you leave true, it will open the browser window, and that will keep opening all the time. So I find it quite annoying. That's why I put this one. And for these options, for example, this one, I found it by reading the documentation. If you go to the website again and do on the tooling, here on config, here there are all the options. You can use it on your application. For example, that's the dev server option that I use over there. And my coding editor is telling me that there is something wrong with this file, and it's because of this. This is out of this doesn't belong to the compiler option, is outside of it. Sorry about that. So now this is ready. We should be able to start creating some components and start our server with the start scripting here. So let's create a a file that is going to host our main component. And here we're using type TSX for the TypeScript with JSX. So a stencil component is basically a JavaScript class with a few decorators attached to it. So let's create a class called app. And here we're gonna render. Let's do a H1. So here's complaining that doesn't know what to do with this. That's because we don't have, we're not saying to it that it's JSX that we're trying to write over here. So JSX was built by Facebook to use in the React framework. And it's a templating language. It allows you to use JavaScript together with HTML. So this is a class. JavaScript class is rendering something out. To make it a stencil component, you first need to add component. So let's import it. And here, this component will take a few options. The most important is the tag. And the tag is what you're going to use to insert this component in other components. So I'm gonna call it app root. And here's the thing, you can't just add like this because as to make it a web component, you must namespace it, otherwise it won't work. The non-namespaced one, like the normal HTML, they are reserved and you can just use, you cannot do yours like that. So remember to always namespace your components and you're good to go. This option in here also accepts a few other parameters. I find the best way to learn is just to inspect the components or the properties and stuff. If you control click on the component, it will tell you everything that is accepted. So like for example, you can pass style sheet URL, tell it to use shadow DOM, for example. So on this component, because it's our root component, we're just gonna use it to put our routes. I'm not gonna add a CSS file to it, so I'm just gonna leave it like this. Now let's go ahead and try this component. On our index folder, I'm just gonna paste inside our body. So now let's run our application with npm start. This will compile our files into plain JavaScript and serve into this localhost and this port. So if you control click in it, here you go, have a blank page. Nice. If you inspect, you see that our body has nothing to it. You have our app component, but this script tag over here is just a service worker placeholder. So let's see what's going on. If you go back to our source folder, here in our index, we have our app component, but if you check the code that was produced by the compiler, here on our index, we only have this, and there is nothing else linking our code to our JavaScript. So we need to add a script that tags our HTML file to these two files over here, which is what was created by the compiler. And to do that, we just need to go back to our index.html. Not this index, this was produced by the compiler and will be deleted every time you run the build command. We only work on the source folder. So here, just inside our header tag, we can add a link to our style sheet from this folder and the JavaScript. Now if you save it, our compiler saw the change on the index because you're watching it, and we can see our hello world. Now here on the app root, we can find our JavaScript code that was compiled. So that's about it. You don't need that many files. You don't need many dependencies to create a stencil application. This is awesome. If you take something like React, it's tons of dependencies that you add to your application just to have using the Create React app. That's like a big difference when you're building something. You can rely that broken package won't interfere with your application.